A lot for you here, as Rania has already mentioned. We'll be going around the world as we always do. So many different things are happening right now, and we want to start with Syria, where, as you mentioned, Rania, there's been a significant uptick in violence and an expansion of conflict there, and Israel, of course, playing a central role in stoking the flames. So it seems. So we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Elijah Magnier, the veteran war correspondent. Elijah, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, great to have you here. And I mean, it's there's so many facets to this. It's almost hard to know where to start. But I mean, I think the first one is, I mean, it appears to me that the sort of broader Israeli strategy here, and perhaps maybe where it fits in with some of other things they've been doing around the region, is it seems to me to sort of partition Syria and to do everything they possibly can to keep those who may be against them in any way, shape, or form divided. But I wonder, how you're looking at the overall goal of Israel, which of course is claiming they're doing this bombing to protect the Druze people of Syria.
Well, I think the obvious strategy of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is to divide Syria. That is the easiest thing and the easiest positive outcome for him because Israel needs to expand. As Donald Trump said, it's a very tiny place and needs to be enlarged. And this is exactly what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing in Lebanon and in Syria. And what is odd for many people to see how Benjamin Netanyahu started to attack Syria when Bashar al-Assad fell and was removed from power, and then advancing the troop to occupy the Golan Heights, the Hermon, the Mount of Hermon, and then advancing toward the Sueda. So today he's talking even about demilitarizing zone. So he doesn't want any of the Syrian troop to advance south of the capital Damascus toward the border. So we're talking about 75 kilometers long where no military troop from the governments are allowed according to the Israeli. We're talking about the Syrian sovereignty, Syrian territory. So for Israel, the best scenario is really to divide Syria, where he can take a large part of the south of Syria, and we're talking here about Daraa and Sueda, and that will be a great opportunity for him for different reasons. First, it is the objective of the Likud party and the far right wing Israeli to enlarge Israel to take part of Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, eventually on the long term. But also, if he manages to include Sueda and Daraa, he will have at least 750,000 strong Druze population that can reinforce Israel's grip over the Golan Heights, offer a buffer zone to the northern frontier. So he has there around 25 to 30,000 settlers living in 30 settlement in the Syrian occupied Golan Heights. So he has occupied the Golan Heights, and this is where he sent the settlers to live in. And if he manages to include Sueda, then he will have a good 10 to 20,000 men to be enrolled in his army, and he needs that for his expansionist objectives.
Elijah, I want to ask you about the Syrian side of things here, now that you've explained the Israeli goals. Because, obviously what we witnessed after clashes broke out between the Druze in Sueda and the Bedouin tribes in Daraa, which has happened in the past, is Mohammed al-Jolani, Ahmed al-Shara, whatever you want to call him, seemed to use this as an opportunity to send his forces, his HTS forces, to carry out sectarian atrocities across Sueda. And this comes after what we saw them do on the coast a few months ago. And I'm just a little confused of what the thinking was there, because did Jolani think that perhaps because the U.S. had lifted sanctions and he had said he was going to normalize with the Israelis, or was hinting that he would and showing signs of it, that maybe that meant he could do whatever he want? It made him feel emboldened, because it seems to have really backfired for him.
Yes and no, because first of all, he did not oppose the Israeli bombardment and destruction of all the Syrian military warehouses. Funny bit is when the Israelis would destroy dozens of military warehouses, missiles, navy, tanks, helicopters, the Syrian media and other media supporting Abu Muhammad al-Julani, Abu Ahmed al-Shara, the self-declared president, they would call it the remnant of the Bashar al-Assad regime weapons. Like these weapons do no longer belong to the Syrian army, which is really gaslighting people to say, oh, these are not ours, so the Israeli can bomb them. So what the Syrian army was left with is light weapons. And light weapons is always a favorite of the Israelis to leave because that leads to a civil war. In Lebanon today, they are asking for the missiles and drone of Hezbollah. They don't want the light weapons. So it's the same scenario everywhere, and light weapons are a very good tool when countries can put people together for sectarian use or ethnic or whatever. Now, for Ahmed al-Shara, he said clearly that he is not an enemy of Israel. He met with Donald Trump in the presence of the Saudi Crown Prince. The Emiratis adopted him, the Qataris adopting him, and he said to the Americans, I'm all yours. In fact, the moment when the Israelis were bombing Sueda, the CIA was meeting with the Syrian intelligence in Damascus. So they were there, they have a full collaboration. Now, for Shara, he has taken his decision. He wants to have a peace deal with Israel only when the Saudis will walk in and will accept to normalize. Then he will join in with the other Gulf countries because he can't go solo. He would be completely isolated by the Gulf countries. They will not accept that because they are the ones who are promoting him, and he can't go on his own because he needs their money. Now, for the Israelis, this is not a good scenario. They don't want anyone to be close to the Americans, but through Israel. Israel is not taking the role of a policeman, but taking the role of the master and the dominant of the Middle East. And for Ahmed al-Shara, even if the Israelis warned him not to cross south of Damascus with his army, he will abide by it and he will not reject the Israeli order, but he will continue relying on the Gulf countries and the Americans to find a solution. And the reason why the Israelis did that is because the Shara said, I don't want an embassy in Damascus now. I would have an embassy only when all the Arab countries will join in the same objective and will all have an Israeli embassy. So for Israel, in this particular moment under Benjamin Netanyahu, he needs a war. He's stopping now the war in Gaza for temporary, for a ceasefire, maybe starting with 60 days and can last. His chief of staff is Zamir is already saying we have achieved the objective. So he goes for another war against Syria. Now he has declared that he has accepted the ceasefire with the Syrian when actually there is no ceasefire because he is the only one firing. The Syrians are not firing against him. In the meantime, he is gathering 3 divisions. We're talking about more or less 40,000 troops, 30 to 40,000 troops. So in addition to the division that exists in the Golan Heights, he's adding a reservist division and he's bringing the Division 98 from Gaza to the Golan Heights. So his plan in the southern Syria is not over. And for him to take part of Syria and then negotiate a normalization of the relationship between Syria and Israel, that would be the best scenario for Benjamin Netanyahu to present himself to the Israeli citizens who are still after him for his corruption cases, etc. And he will just say, well, I have done a lot for Israel, so now it's time for you to pardon me and for me to call for the early elections.
Well, I mean, I also am curious because as we get closer to the UN General Assembly, there are rumors that Ahmed al-Sharaa and Netanyahu will be meeting on the sidelines. And then, here in Lebanon, Elijah, you've had Tom Barrack, who's actually the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, but has become a kind of like U.S. envoy to Syria. And now it seems Lebanon, he's taken over I don't know if you want to say Steve Witkoff role for the time being. And he's been talking about disarming Hezbollah, which you referenced before, and that the U.S. is essentially pushing for the Lebanese government to either disarm Hezbollah completely, and he even uses terminology like house to house, or I don't even know what the or is, or just like basically threatening full force. I'm not really sure. It's basically like the Israelis are in charge of policy. And then, so Lebanon has that going on from its south. And then there's Syria, where you have Ahmed al-Sharaa being very aggressive towards Lebanon. There's a lot of concerns now about Lebanese security in terms of Sharaa using his forces potentially to carry out terrorist attacks in Lebanon, which, would just be blamed on like ISIS factions. And there have been a few foiled plots so far, which really just seems like state-sponsored terrorism here. And on top of that, you hear rumors, I don't know how true they were, that he was floating the idea of, taking Tripoli, and that was something that Tom Barrack referenced. And also he's pushing for the Syrian prisoners in Lebanon to be released. And when I say Syrian prisoners here, I mean people who have actually committed terrorist attacks in Lebanon. And not just Syrians, by the way, also rumors that he's pushing for the release of Ahmed al-Assir, the Lebanese extremist sheikh, I think he's a sheikh, who is basically responsible for the murder of many Lebanese soldiers in the past. But I'm just curious your thoughts on this, sort of unofficial collaboration almost between the Israelis and Syrians now against the resistance in Lebanon.
Well, you mentioned many important points. So if I may, I would respond to... Yeah. So you mentioned the north of Lebanon. So Thomas Barrack, the U.S. ambassador in Turkey and U.S. envoy to Syria and Lebanon, said that, well, actually Syria, the great Syria and the Levant can return and impose its control over the north of Lebanon, that is Tripoli and Akkar. Well, I think what he is threatening the resistance that Lebanon will start losing apart when these two areas count for 700,000 Sunni, and Hezbollah, I don't think, will regret if these will be no longer part of Lebanon, if the Americans want to threaten Hezbollah with these, and then the Shia would be the majority and they will still be the strongest, even more than before. But the problem are the Christian, because that will put the Takfiri, the extremists who are responsible for the massacre against the Druze and against the Alawite, on the front line with the Christian in Lebanon. So if Akkar and Tripoli would go, then the next border is Junim, Ameltain, and all this area, and that will be the border of the Christian area. So basically what he's doing is frightening the Christian with his threat. Secondly, by saying Syria can invade Lebanon and take part of it, well, it's a more reason for the resistance to keep his weapons, because who's going to defend Lebanon if the Takfiri attack, in particular when the Lebanese army is not allowed to be equipped to defend itself by the Americans, and Hezbollah has already 10 years of experience fighting the Takfiri in Syria and Iraq and prevailing over them. Therefore, this is again a way for Hezbollah to say, well, thank you very much, Thomas Barrack, you're giving more reason for us to exist. And the third point is, with all the flirting between Thomas Barrack and Ahmed al-Sharaa and the Americans and the Syrian new leadership, lifting the sanctions, embracing the new Syrian regime, and then we see how the Israelis just move in, bomb Damascus, bomb the Ministry of Defense, the vicinity of the presidential palace, and then give a warning to the Syrian army that it cannot cross south of the capital, and the whole area after that for 75 kilometers is under the Israeli control. That is again another reason for the Lebanese to say, well, there is no actually a guarantor, because the Americans are part of the problem and not the solution. Therefore, all these menaces that are going on from the Americans on the Lebanese to impose on Hezbollah to deliver its missile and drone only, that is not working very well, because in Lebanon there are other priorities. Nobody's talking about the withdrawal of the Israelis from the occupied territory. And we're talking about the Rajar, we're talking about Kfar Shuba Hills, the Sheba Farm, and we're talking about the 5 new hills that the Israelis occupy in the 2024 war. We're talking about the water in Wazani, where Lebanon is taking only 4 million cubic meters, when it is allowed, according to the agreement, to take 43 million. We're talking about the violation of the Israelis of the airspace, the maritime and the land border between Lebanon and Israel, and nobody is stopping the Israeli. We're talking about the daily killing of the Israeli of Lebanese by air and drone without any intervention from the Americans. There are so many other priorities that the Lebanese have on their list prior the delivery of the Hezbollah weapons. So I don't think Hezbollah is going to move that way, because there is nobody who can guarantee that Israel will respect the deal.
Well, a lot to keep following, a lot to keep watching. Its plot only seems to thicken. So as always, Elijah, we really appreciate you joining us here and helping us sort through it all on the freedom side.
Thank you very much for having me.